first time Eli opened the wardrobe, he expected nothing more than the smell of old cedar and the sight of his father's flannel shirt stacked crookedly on the bottom shelf. Instead, he saw himself. At first, he thought it was a trick of the moonlight spilling through the crooked blinds. His own pale face stared back at him, framed by the cracked wood of the wardrobe. But something was wrong. The boy standing inside looked like him, yes. The same messy dark hair, the same tired eyes. But his skin carried a gray pallor, and his lips hung slack, almost bruised. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He lifted his hand. The boy on the other side did not. Eli slammed the wardrobe shut so hard the glass on the old oil lamp rattled. For a long moment he stood there, his chest rising and falling like he had sprinted up the ridge behind their cabin. He waited for his father to shout from the next room, for his mother to ask what he was doing awake so late. But the house was silent, as if the mountains themselves had swallowed every sound. He pressed his ear against the door. Nothing, just the hollow thump of his own pulse. Slowly, he backed away, crawled into bed, and pulled the quilt over his head like he had when he was a child. Still, it felt like eyes were on him, watching from behind that door. But the reflection wasn't him. Not anymore. The Harlow family had lived in that cabin for 3 generations, tucked deep in the folds of the Appalachian hills. Folks in town called it a forgotten house, the kind of place the forest wanted back. Its roof sagged, its porch creaked, and the wind scraped branches against the siding at night like fingers desperate to get in. Eli's father, John, was a hunter and a hard man, his voice like gravel. His mother, Ruth, was softer but tired, her hands always smelling of soap and wood smoke. Life wasn't easy, but Eli had grown used to the rhythm of it. The rooster's cry, the endless chores, the nights when the coyotes wailed across the ridge. The wardrobe had been there longer than anyone remembered. Thick oak, carved with strange patterns that no one had ever bothered to decipher. His father claimed his grandfather brought it from somewhere back east. His mother said it had simply always been there. Nobody thought much about it. Nobody but Eli. No one remembered bringing it into the house. Yet it had always been there. The second time he opened it, he didn't mean to. He had woken in the middle of the night, shivering. The fire in the stove had burned down to ashes, and his quilt had slipped to the floor. Half asleep, he staggered to the wardrobe to grab the extra blanket his mother always kept there. He pulled the door open. There was no blanket. There was only the room, their room, but not. The bed was there, but empty. The lamp on the nightstand glowed, though he had never lit it. And standing just inside the wardrobe's frame was the other boy. Eli's face, but older somehow. His cheekbones sharper, his eyes sunken, as though he hadn't slept in years. The boy opened his mouth as if to speak. No sound came out. Instead, a mist rolled from his lips, curling into the air like smoke from a dying fire. Eli stumbled back, knocking into the chair by the desk. "What the hell?" he whispered. His voice cracked. The other boy didn't move, didn't blink. And then, as Eli raised his trembling hand, the boy's arm jerked upward, but not in time with his own. Not a reflection, a choice. And when Eli raised his hand, the other boy didn't mirror him. Eli slammed the wardrobe door again. This time, something struck from the other side. A dull, heavy thud, like a fist against wood. He froze. His skin prickled. His ears rang. For hours he sat in the chair, staring at the wardrobe, waiting for it to move again. His mind scrambled for answers. a dream, a trick, a shadow, anything but what he'd seen. At dawn, when his father's boots stomped across the floorboards, Eli finally crawled back into bed. At breakfast, he tried to speak. His spoon clinked against the bowl of grits as he said, "Dad, you ever notice anything strange about the old wardrobe?" John didn't look up from his plate. "Strange? It's a wardrobe, son. Holds clothes. That's all." Ruth smiled faintly. "Don't tell me you're scared of it now. You used to hide in there when you were little." Eli swallowed hard. What if there was something on the other side? His father finally looked at him, his brow low and stern. Other side of what? "Stop talking nonsense." The conversation ended there. But that night, long after his parents had gone to bed, Eli heard it again. The steps, soft, measured, from inside the wardrobe. And this time, he wasn't the only one who heard them. The footsteps had been faint at first, barely audible like a loose board creaking in the wind. But that night, they grew louder, slow, measured, pacing across the floor that should not exist. Eli sat frozen on the edge of his bed, clutching the quilt in his fists. The sound wasn't in his head. He knew that now because his mother stirred in the next room. "John?" she whispered, her voice muffled through the thin wall. "Do you hear that?" His father's gruff reply came a moment later. "Hear what?" "The steps," she said, her tone sharper, like someone's walking in the house. Eli's stomach turned to stone. The wardrobe creaked. Just slightly, but enough. He stared at the carved wooden door and held his breath. The next morning, Ruth's face was pale over breakfast. She barely touched her food, stirring the eggs until they turned cold. "I know what I heard," she said quietly. John shook his head, rubbing his temples. "House settles. Wind knocks things loose, that's all." "But it wasn't the wind," Ruth insisted. Her eyes flicked toward Eli. "It was footsteps." Right here in this room, Eli said nothing. His throat was dry, his heart pounding just remembering it. John grunted. "You two been filling your heads with nonsense. There's no one in this house but us." But even as he said it, his gaze lingered on the wardrobe for a fraction too long. And Eli realized his father had heard them too. That evening, Eli tried to avoid the wardrobe altogether. He read by lantern light, every creak of the house setting his nerves on edge. When the wind pressed against the windows, he jumped. When the floor groaned under his father's boots, he nearly dropped the book. "Boy," John barked from his chair, "you're twitching like a rabbit. Quit staring at that old cabinet. It ain't gonna bite you." Eli forced a nod, but he couldn't stop staring. Later, when his parents were asleep, he rose from bed. The air was cold, sharp in his lungs. He walked to the wardrobe. His hand hovered over the handle, trembling. "Don't," he whispered to himself. But he pulled it open anyway. The inside wasn't empty this time. A dim gray light spilled out, casting his room in a strange glow. And standing there was his mother, Ruth, but not the Ruth he knew. Her face was gaunt, her eyes clouded, her mouth twisted into a sorrowful smile. "Eli," she said in a voice that was hers and not hers, layered and hollow. "Come home." He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair. You're not real," he whispered. Her smile deepened. "I am. And I'm waiting." The wardrobe door slammed shut on its own. And Eli realized whatever was behind that door could take familiar shapes. The following days blurred into unease. Ruth avoided the room altogether. claiming she was too busy in the kitchen or tending the garden. John, though he mocked them, began sleeping with his rifle propped against the wall. Eli noticed how he locked the door at night, something he had never done before. And the sounds grew worse. Sometimes it was footsteps, other times whispers, low and tangled, like voices carried on the wind. Once, Eli swore he heard laughter, high-pitched, broken, like a child's toy winding down. On the fourth night, it changed. He was half asleep when he heard the creak. The wardrobe door was opening, not from his side, from theirs. He sat up in bed, paralyzed. The air grew icy, his breath clouding in the moonlight. Slowly, unbearably slow, the wardrobe door creaked wider. And then he saw a hand, gray thin, fingernails blackened, curling, reaching. Eli couldn't scream. He couldn't move. And then the hand slipped back, the door shutting with a soft click. He sat awake until dawn, trembling, waiting for it to open again. The next morning, John caught him staring at the wardrobe. "You stay away from that thing," his father muttered, voice low, as though afraid the wardrobe itself might overhear. Eli looked at him in shock. "You know, don't you?" John's jaw clenched. "I know enough." "Then what is it?" Eli pressed. "What's on the other side?" John didn't answer. He only stood, gripped the rifle, and left the room. And Eli understood. Whatever haunted that wardrobe wasn't new. His father had known all along. The nights grew longer, colder. Eli counted them not by the moon, but by how many times the wardrobe whispered. He barely slept, sitting upright with his quilt wrapped tight, ears straining for the smallest sound. Every time he thought it might finally be over, the quiet splintered with the soft creak of a board, or the hushed murmur of voices he couldn't quite understand. On the seventh night, the voices grew clearer. "Eli." They sighed. "Eli." Not one voice, but many. His grandmother, a cousin long dead, even a classmate who had drowned 2 winters back. They called to him from the other side, patient, persistent. And for the first time, Eli wondered if the wardrobe wasn't calling him, but trying to take him. The next morning, John sat at the table, his rifle leaning against the wall like a warning. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly as he poured coffee. "Dad," Eli whispered. "You know what it is?" John didn't answer. "You knew all along," Eli pressed. "That's why you keep the rifle. That's why you lock the doors." Finally, John spoke, his voice rough. "It don't matter what it is. What matters is you never open that door again, but it's already opening on its own," Eli said. John's jaw tightened. He said nothing more. And Eli realized his father wasn't trying to keep something out. He was trying to keep them from going in. That night, the wardrobe door didn't creak. It exploded open with a thunderous crack. A freezing wind roared into the room, carrying the stench of wet earth and rot. The wooden frame splintered, widening into something far larger than a door. Pale, gray light spilled across the floorboards as shadows poured through. Figures stepped out. Not strangers, familiar faces. His grandmother, his cousin, the drowned boy. All of them smiling with mouths that didn't belong to them, their eyes hollow, their bodies bent like broken dolls. "Eli," they whispered in unison. "Come home." He screamed, pressing against the headboard. John burst in with a rifle and fired into the gray light. The blast made the figures shudder, but they did not vanish. "Ruth," John shouted, "get him out!" But Ruth stood frozen, her eyes filled with tears. "I see my mother," she whispered. "She's waiting for me." "No," John roared. "That ain't her." But Ruth moved forward. She reached into the gray light, and in an instant, her body dissolved. A heartbeat later, something else stepped out, a perfect copy of her. Same dress, same face. But the smile was wrong. The eyes were empty. "Eli," it said, voice doubled and hollow. "I told you. I'm waiting." Eli backed away in horror. "Dad." John's face had gone pale. His hands tightened on the rifle, but even he seemed to falter. The wardrobe groaned again, widening further, the wood tearing apart as more figures pushed through. The cabin shook, dust falling from the beams above. The lantern flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed the room. And in that darkness, Eli realized the whispers weren't coming from the wardrobe anymore. They were all around him. If this story unsettled you, leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.